Okay, so hey, my name is Isaac Cohen. I am a solutions engineer for GitHub. We're going to be talking about one of my most exciting topics to talk about, Hubot and robots and chatops. There's a couple of different phases to this talk. So we're going to start off with introing why we invested a lot in chat and chatops. We're going to talk a little bit about what Hubot does within GitHub. We're going to then do a deep dive into how GitHub actually builds and deploys GitHub.com using a number of tools, including Jenkins. And then we're going to go through a couple of integrations between Hubot and Jenkins as well. So a couple of interesting topics that we'll cover. If you were reading Wired in 2015, you would have noticed this article, the most important startup's hardest worker isn't a person. We like to joke within GitHub that the hardest GitHubber isn't a person, it's actually Hubot. Hubot does all of the necessary actions that we need to do on a day-to-day within our chat client. So Hubot is an open source chatbot that we created about 6 years ago, or that we open sourced about 6 years ago. He lives in our Slack. And we interact with Hubot just like we would interact with a human. The only difference is it's not a human, it's a bot. He does a lot of different things, from generating memes, so some silly things, to gathering information, all the way to building and deploying GitHub. We're going to talk a lot about Hubot, but before we do, I think it's important to discuss why he is important, why we decided to invest in Hubot and chatops. If you look at communication can be a challenge within organizations. Especially if you look at like DevOps, if you look at Agile, all of these buzz terms, they're all really trying to solve one main problem, which is how do we communicate with each other? So some theories are, okay, you want to separate, let's say, your different work streams or your different teams in a certain way. But the essential part of that is how do we communicate with each other? Because communication is a challenge, especially with different teams trying to create one software product. Looking at GitHub itself, we are a worldwide organization. So we're actually distributed around the world. About 36% of GitHubbers live in San Francisco, but everybody else is all over the place. I'm actually out of New York. I came in for Jenkins World. When you are a global organization, that adds to some of those communication problems. Because not only do you have different teams, but you also have people who are not seeing each other face to face every day. You have people in different time zones. I know that was one of the biggest challenges for me, is working with another person in a different time zone in India or in Australia, where they're 12 hours apart. How do we communicate with each other when we are in a global organization? GitHub is a remote-first culture. And what that means is we embrace the concepts of remote work. So it's not just, oh, we have some remote people, but everything that we do is trying to embrace that remote work. And we'll see what that means later on. So I said, OK, GitHub is a worldwide organization. It's distributed around the world. But stepping back to the more traditional item, if you look at DevOps, they're always trying to solve those silos that occur within teams. So you have the project managers, you have the developers, you have the release team. There was always that silo between each team, et cetera. And of course, DevOps comes in to try and bridge that. But that's very nice for one team. What do you do when you have multiple teams? I mean, if you're doing microservices, a lot of times you have like one team per microservice or something like that. And then now you have 50 different microservices, 50 different teams that need to communicate with each other. You need to figure out what's going on from a project management perspective. That's usually very, very complicated. So again, I just want to highlight, these are all communication problems. These are all challenges that are based off of communication. Information can be very imbalanced in this situation. So There are some teams that will know a topic better than other teams. When you hire a new person, they are the ultimate of an information imbalance because they don't know anything. So they need to ramp up really quickly. How do you solve for these information imbalances between different teams? Because believe it or not, information imbalances, that's what actually causes strife between teams. A lot of times people just aren't in sync together. I used to work for a large financial services company. There were 250,000 employees. How do you communicate with everybody? It used to take me time just to figure out which team to talk to in order to do something. All of these information imbalances are pretty much in all of our organizations. So one thing that I'd like to say, so GitHub is, of course, the center of open source development. 65 million repositories today, 25 million users. We like to take a page out of how open source actually develops, because they are able to communicate in a global organization, albeit not an official organization, but they are communicating all over the world in order to complete a software project. They are using different teams' components in order to create that open source project. So this is something that we see over and over again. So let's go into a little bit about how open source actually works and how they communicate with each other. Well, one thing that we know is that both Agile and open source favor organic communication over documentation and process. That's not to knock documentation and process. Documentation and process is very important still, but we favor the ad hoc communication, the organic communication between each other. The traditional mindset was to to focus on documentation as part of your phases. But over here, we're sort of doing this informally. And the process is becoming self-evident from how people are communicating. So if you look at Agile, by the way, Agile usually will recommend stuff like co-location or synchronous meetings, but realistically, that doesn't happen. Realistically, you are global. So how do you have that organic communication between each other when you are a global organization? And I'd like to say that transparency solves for process. So when you have a transparent organization, when people or teams are very transparent with each other, that process becomes very evident based on the methods that you're using. So if you're using like an electronic communication method, then everybody can see that same chat or something. And that solves for some of the process that you may have had to have done beforehand. We prefer systems that naturally capture process. We'll discuss a little bit more of what that actually means. One of the biggest quotes in GitHub, and every GitHubber knows this, is we write things down. Everything that we do needs to be written down. So we actually prefer asynchronous communication over synchronous meetings, meaning over video calls or video chats or actual meetings. We like to write everything down. Because when you write everything down, you can then look at the history of why a decision was made and how that decision was made. When I joined GitHub 6 months ago, I was able to search 5 years back into why a certain decision was made. So we write things down. This is like one of the big tenets at GitHub. Additionally, when people are out sick, this is a very common thing. So you have a meeting, and then some person calls out sick. Well, all of a sudden, they're removed from the conversation. If you're in a global organization, a lot of times people are making decisions in North America and leaving out the rest of the organization. And that causes the people outside to feel disconnected from the company. So just to summarize where we've gone so far, we've talked about, let's say, 4 main parts or 4 main components of open source. One is we prefer electronic communication. We like for things to be available, so we like for there to be links to everything. We prefer asynchronous communication, so communication that doesn't necessarily need to take place in a meeting. And one other thing, by the way, we like things to be informal. So That means you can use emojis, because emojis actually convey tone that may not be available in like a one-line answer. I just want to caution that informal doesn't mean unprofessional. It still means professional, but with a little bit more of leeway with emojis and fun stuff. And for all of this, this is why we decided to invest very heavily in chat. Chat is inherently asynchronous. When you are talking within like a Slack channel, that is inherently asynchronous. You are saying something and then waiting for a response back from another person, which can take an hour, it can take a day, it can take 2 days. But that's the asynchronous nature of that. Chat is transparent. Everybody sees exactly what is going on within a chat room. And what I said before, chat captures and exposes who made what decision and why. And I think that's one of the most important pieces, is that it captures who made that decision and why, so that you can go back in the future, go back in the past. So for all of these reasons, we decided to invest in Hubot. By the way, Hubot is open source, so you can go check it out, hubot.github.com. To relay what I said in the beginning, Hubot is an open source chatbot. He lives in our Slack channel. He lives in our Slack room. And whenever we want to do any actions, we'll tell Hubot, hey, you know what? Can you generate this meme for us? Or can you deploy GitHub? Can you view our data center cameras? We literally do everything from Hubot itself. Hubot started 6 years ago, or a couple of years ago, when we integrated Hubot with Campfire. So that was sort of our initial go at things. He would listen into the activity rooms and respond based on certain keywords that we placed into Campfire. But since then, Hubot's actually grown. So we now have a lot of different adapters with whatever chat client you're using today. We personally use Slack, but Hubot integrates with HipChat, Yammer, FlowDoc, a lot of different chat clients. Really, as long as your chat client has a bot interface, Hubot can then interact with you. So before I go on into like some of the things that Hubot can do and how we deploy using GitHub, using Hubot at GitHub, let me actually show you a real-life example. So I'm going to pull up my Slack, and I'm going to create a new channel right now. We'll call this Hubot test. Create that channel. And I'm going to invite Hubot. You have to invite Hubot into your channel in order for him to interact with you. Hubot, what are the rules? OK, good. Hubot knows Isaac Asimov's rules, so he's not going to take over the world. That's always very important. But you see how Hubot responds. So whatever you're typing in, when you type in Hubot, he's going to listen for certain commands, and then he's going to respond to you. So that was something very cute. We can do other things like Hubot pug me, or rather Hubot ship it. And he gives us a squirrel. So these are some of the funny things that Hubot does. This is part of the culture that we try to instill into Hubot. Hubot has a personality, which I'm going to talk about beforehand, afterwards. But I just wanted to show you how we interact with Hubot. And remember, Hubot lives in your channel, so everybody else is also seeing what Hubot is saying or what Hubot is responding as well. All right, let's move back to the slides. So we start to talk about culture ops. This is what we call it, culture ops. Hubot has a number of different cultural things that he can do. I don't know about you, but I feel sometimes about DevOps like that. If we do Hubot codified DevOps, he's going to spit us out a meme of DevOps. We also have a whole Sparkle system as well. So for example, like if I want to thank a person for doing something publicly, I'll sparkle over here. I sparkled G Paddock for helping me come up with an awesome title for this presentation. And Hubot remembers. So Hubot then tallies that up, and now G Paddock has 309 imaginary sparkles. Now, this may seem silly and futile, but remember, when you are in a remote-first workplace, when you want to thank somebody, a lot of times you're actually just telling them privately or something like that. Over here, this is a way to publicly say thank you for doing something for me. But again, Hubot has a personality. So for example, Jason tried to sparkle himself, and Hubot didn't like that. He responded, nothing wrong with a pat on the back, eh? So there's a whole system, and there's a personality to Hubot, which gives us, of course, a love-hate relationship with him. So you see some of the different functionalities within Culture Ops that we use Hubot for. Hubot you can also create your own scripts for Hubot as well. So we have a repository within GitHub that has all the Hubot scripts. But if a person wants to create a new script, they just create a pull request against that repository, and that will be included in another Hubot script. So for example, over here you see Jamie, JB Jones Jr., he created a new camel Hubot script. For some reason, we've become obsessed with camels in the East Team Slack channel. So every time that a person puts a camel or the camel emoji into Slack, Hubot will respond with an interesting fact. So for example, when they are provoked, camels spit greenish substance from this topic, whatever. But what's interesting is that now when we meet in a meeting, we start talking about camels. This seems funny, but this is what creates that camaraderie within a global organization. Hubot never forgets. Hubot remembers everything. We can say, Hubot, Kyle Macy is a CoffeeScript cowboy. And then when we ask Hubot, who is Kyle Macy, he's going to respond back with all of the different statements that people have told Hubot about Kyle Macy. The longer you work at GitHub, the longer your history becomes. So these are some of the fun and cute things. We use Hubot as well for filling out information or filling out documents. So when we need to fill out, for example, a PO, I don't remember the address of GitHub headquarters, so address me. And that will give us the address. Or DUNS me. Whoever knows what a DUNS number is, it doesn't really matter. But when you're filling out certain forms for the government, you need this DUNS number. And Hubot remembers everything. So we're constantly interacting with Hubot, whether on a silly space or on a more informational gathering perspective, because that actually helps us do our work. I don't know all of this information off the top of my head. The other thing to note, by the way, is I don't know all of the commands that Hubot knows. The way I learn commands is just by looking at other people execute those commands. So I learned about dunsme when Elizabeth executed dunsme. And now it's very easy for me to remember what the DUNS number is. Remember, by the way, Hubot has that personality, so he had to stick in the "da" at the end. OK, so we've introed a little bit about Hubot. We've talked a little bit about what Hubot can do. Now let's go into the DevOps perspective. I guess before I go into DevOps, do we have any questions so far? Awesome. Can't wait till the end. So these are some of the things that Hubot does from a DevOps perspective. He can view cameras in our data center, will search error logs for us, even adjust firewalls, as well as configure the DNS. When we want to go into like a yellow state, let's say within GitHub status, we do that from Hubot itself. If you notice at the top over there, Hubot noticed an increased amount of exceptions within a branch that was just deployed into production. He's going to then alert us and tell us, hey, listen, you might want to look at Haystack. I'll get into that later on. You might want to look into our exception monitoring service because I'm noticing that something's a little awry. But actually, the second chart, or the dash me, that's probably one of my favorite examples to talk about. What you notice over there is Ben Bolter wanted to get a couple of charts based on the GitHub, how many GitHub pages are building right now. So we did a dash me, which means we're going to retrieve some charts. We want the last 3 hours, so minus 3 hours, and pages.builds. That's going to retrieve for us the charts of the aggregate information on how many GitHub pages sites are being built right now. But what you notice is because this is in a public Slack channel, Parker then comments and says, is something wrong? He didn't even have to say anything to Parker. Parker immediately noticed that he wanted that chart and asked, is something wrong? This is part of the proactive nature of having everything transparent, of having people just see what's going on within your Slack channel. So these are some of the various examples of DevOps that Hubot does on a day-to-day basis. Again, you will see Hubot in every one of our Slack channels because of this. As I said before, everyone sees everything. This leads to decreased ramp-up times, because the process becomes evident. You see exactly what commands you will need to run, and you just do it. One thing to note, some of these commands can only be run in certain Slack channels, which we'll talk about. So for example, if you want to deploy github.com, that's only going to be run in the .com ops Slack channel, because we want everybody to see it. We don't want you to just create a private Slack channel and start deploying to GitHub. OK, so we've talked a little bit about the DevOps commands. Let's actually do a deep dive into how GitHub builds and deploys on a daily basis. We use a number of different technologies, all centered around Hubot. We have GitHub. We have Jenkins and Janky. I'm going to talk a little bit about Janky, but not that much. So in the back end, all of our builds are running on Jenkins. But we have this wrapper in front of Jenkins called Janky. He was created in a pre-pipeline time. So we wanted to do pipeline as code a long time ago. We wanted to dynamically create freestyle jobs pretty much on the fly. So we created this Janky robot, which you'll see me reference. So when we create a new branch, we execute a command, and it will create that freestyle job. I'm not going to talk too much about Janky anymore, because realistically, you can use a GitHub organization, or you can use pipelines, which will do a lot of that work for you. But you'll see me reference it from here to there. There are 2 other services that we also use internally. One is Heaven. Heaven is our deployment manager. It's what manages which deployments go where and actually does or performs the deployment, as well as Haystack. Haystack is our internal exception monitoring service, because sometimes you need to look for a needle in a haystack. So that's an easy way to remember some of the things. From an overall process perspective, so I mapped out the overall process. We're going to go in depth, actually. So first, we create a branch and a pull request. We then set up CI with Jenkins. You can see, by the way, I have a little Hubot guy over there. That just means we're doing it via Hubot. We then check in code. We need to ensure that that code passes CI, and that status that the code has passed CI gets back into GitHub. We then review it, and then we deploy a number of times. So we are actually deploying into a lab environment. We deploy into Canary. We then deploy into production while always checking Haystack to make sure no exceptions are occurring. And only after we've deployed that branch into production are we then merging that branch into master. So we'll go through this in depth, but I just wanted to give you like a 360 view of, a high-level view of what's going on underneath. All right, let's get started. So as I said, the first thing that we do, we use GitHub for pretty much everything. Everybody uses GitHub within our organization. When you create a branch, you also create a pull request. But what you notice over there is that Hubot is also communicating that within your Slack room. So Olmo Kramer created this atom disable middle mouse paste branch. And he also pushed one commit. Now, the interesting thing as well is that we're also linking back to that pull request. So if you see that 35AAFE7, that is a blue link back to the pull request. So it's very easy to switch between Hubot and Slack and back to the actual GitHub pull request that just occurred. After that happens, we then set up CI from Hubot. So again, this might be a little bit more traditional just because we've been doing this for a long time before pipelines were ever created. But what you notice is that Ben Bolter does a .ci. Dot, by the way, you can either do Hubot or dot. It's a shorthand. So Hubot CI setup. We specify exactly what branch that we want. Hubot goes out, talks to Jenkins, creates that freestyle job with a template that we specified. And then, hey, CI, build this specific branch. And of course, Hubot goes and builds it, and then comes back with the status as well. So we are seeing the entire build process happening within Slack, within our chat client. Everybody is seeing this, and we're actually not going out to any services unless we need to. If we want to view the logs, of what just happened, then you just click on the link, and you see the logs of the entire build. So again, Hubot to Jenkins. I mean, that's our basic process for setting up CI. When that happens, we require the build status to be a check. So this is back in our pull request. Our pull request is, you'll notice we have a required status check to make sure that continuous integration, to make sure that Jenkins has actually passed. If it has not passed, it's going to block you from merging that pull request. You're not going to be allowed to do that. We have about 22 checks in order to get into production. So not only is it doing Jenkins a build, but Jenkins is also sending back whether the help doc information is good, whether it's passed linting, and whether it's gotten past our security robot. Actually, 22 different checks in order for everything to go green so that we can merge that back into master. After we've done some builds, after that goes green, then of course we need a code review. So I mean, hopefully this is pretty logical so far. We've set up a branch, we've built it within CI, we've made sure that everything passed. We now go into code review, make sure that somebody has given a thumbs up to it. One thing to note that I sort of glanced upon beforehand is this idea of context switching. So where you can link from Slack back to GitHub or any other external service. But we also have it the other way around. So if you think about chat has a lot of chatter. So there's a lot of information that can happen. I'll go out for a couple of hours and come back with 200 different messages that happens in chat. So a basic problem that we noticed is how do we link up the basic chatter with the longer term, let's say, discussion that happens in a pull request. So a cool thing that we've done and that we've designed is whenever we mention an issue or a pull request, Hubot will then go out to that pull request and link back to that Slack conversation. Every conversation, every line, or every sentence that a person puts in Slack or a lot of different chat clients is individually linkable. Each conversation has a permalink that you can link back to. So now when we go to that pull request, we can see where that discussion happened automatically in the chatops client, in Slack. So we have that context switching. We don't want to lose any information. Slack is going to have more of the day-to-day or quick information that's happening, but we also want to get that back into GitHub. OK, so we've done all of that. We now want to deploy. How do we deploy? again, we deploy using Heaven and Hubot. There are three main commands that every GitHubber knows. WCID, where can I deploy? And QMTD, queue me to deploy. So we have a deployment queue. We don't want everybody deploying at the same time to the same location. So the first thing that we do is we normally will deploy to lab, and then deploy, when everything looks nice, into Canary production. But what you notice is that production gets locked. Again, we don't want everybody deploying at the same time, so we're locking production when a deployment is currently going on. What we then do is we say, hey, you know what, queue me to deploy. And Hubot will say, OK, I've queued Ben Bolter to deploy. There are 2 people ahead of you. So when those 2 people have finished deploying, or they may have canceled their deployment, Hubot is then going to notify me to say, hey, we are ready now to deploy into production. So then I'll go ahead and say, all right, deploy. That's actually how we deploy into production. We deploy github.com using .deploy, whatever the branch name, and whatever the application name is. That's as simple as it goes. Once that happens, Hubot, of course, notifies us in the pull request as well. So we use the deployment API within GitHub to say, oh, Ben Bolter deployed to production 2 minutes ago. But then Hubot also gives us back the status to tell us whether that deployment has been successful or not. This is all happening within that one .com ops repo, but we're seeing everything as it's happening, and we're seeing the status as well. So again, everything is happening directly from our Slack or from our chat client. We're seeing the entire progress as it goes, and we're able to determine if any exceptions happen as well. By the way, if you noticed, Hubot also alerted Ben to say, make sure you watch for exceptions in Haystack. So if you do find any exception monitoring, this is our internal exception monitoring system. It links directly to Haystack in order to tell us, so that we can monitor to see if there are any upticks in errors or exceptions or anything like that. Remember, by the way, beforehand I said that we wait to deploy into production before we merge the branch to master. The reason for that is once we've deployed that branch into master, we'll wait 5 minutes to see if there are any exceptions. If there are exceptions, we'll just redeploy master and fix that branch. If there aren't any exceptions, then we merge that branch into master, and we're good at that point. OK. So one thing that I hope is very evident by this entire process, we sort of did a deep dive into how GitHub is working internally to deploy and build. One thing that I hope is very obvious at this point is that open workflows capture the process. When you see that process, you know exactly what's going on. You don't have to have a specific documented ITSM process that's happening one after another. You see everything that's going on. Everything else is also being recorded inside your GitHub pull request so that you have the full history of why this happened and how this happened. So again, that overall process that we talked about beforehand, going down from deployment to merging into master. There is one more thing that I wanted to show you, and this is something that I was sort of hacking around over the last 2 weeks. There are direct integrations with Jenkins and Hubot, but I wanted to take things a little bit or a step further. I actually wanted to integrate Jenkins or Hubot with a Jenkins pipeline. And so these are some of the commands that I built. You can check it out, actually, github.com, ISSC29, Hubot-personal. But let me actually show it to you, because I think it was kind of cool. Let me mirror displays. OK. So we're back in this Hubot test directory. What we notice is I have this pipeline that I've created in Jenkins. It's called GitHub app. Let me go back into Slack and say Hubot Jenkins list. All right, so Hubot gave me all of the different jobs that are currently on that Jenkins machine. It's telling me that a lot of things are passing. Hubot Jenkins describe GitHub app. So we see a lot of other information. So we got a URL back to that job. We see that it's currently enabled, and the status is blue. The build stability seems to be stable. Let me run a job right now. We're going to see that this is going to change a little bit. We're going to see that we can view the exact stage status. So Hubot Jenkins last for last job, GitHub app. And what we notice is the pipeline status is currently in pending pause pending input. So we're waiting for like an input or approval input right now. We've successfully gone through the build stage. We've successfully gone through the test stage. But now we're at the deploy stage. All right, I mean, I went over here. I checked everything looks good. Hubot Jenkins approve GitHub app. And we've approved it. So those are some of the integrations that you can create yourself. I sort of hacked this. So there is a Hubot script on Jenkins. I extended it over the last week in order to approve Jenkins pipelines. But you could imagine the power that you can use Hubot within your organization for whatever things that you'd like to automate, whatever external systems you'd like to integrate with, or just from a fun culture ops perspective. I mean, so that's really it from my side. Do we have any questions? OK, so the question was, can Hubot integrate into any chat system? Any chat system that has a bot framework. So as long as it has some sort of bot framework where robots can integrate with that chat system, Hubot will be able to integrate. You'll have to create an adapter. There are a lot of adapters already created, as I showed beforehand. But depending on what chat client, it's possibly possible. Yes?
Where do you keep like all the scripts for your?
Yeah. So the question was, where do you keep all of your scripts? So we have an internal repository at GitHub that has the Hubot scripts. So when a person wants to create a new Hubot script, they just initiate a pull request. And once that pull request is merged into that repository, it's automatically deployed into the Hubot app. By the way, I didn't show this before, but I'm hosting right now Hubot on Heroku, so it's an easy way to host Hubot. Yep.
You're talking a lot about data here. Obviously 5-year-old data or 10-year-old data. Where are we storing this data? How are we going to read it?
Yeah, so the question was, where are we storing this data from like 5 years ago? I mean, it depends. So for us, we're storing a lot of data within GitHub itself. That's recording a lot of information. A lot of information is also being recorded in Slack. When Hubot remembers things, so remember when I showed you that Hubot like remembered the sparkles and stuff? So Hubot is backed usually by a Redis database that's set up automatically. And so that's where Huboters are remembering some of the pieces of information.
Can this upload request can be specific to a few people, or anybody can request the request?
Yeah, so the question was, can this approval request be specific to people, or can anybody do that? Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you design the Hubot script. But absolutely, again, so Hubot, you can script in Node.js or CoffeeScript. So however you design that, and as well as however you design your Jenkins pipeline, you can specify who has the ability to approve something.
Do you find Hubot to be somewhat chatty at times, it seems? Do you find that distracting as you're trying to sort through issues, or do you have any policies in place for when certain chat rooms, Hubot can do this and not? I know you said deployments before.
Yeah, so the question was can Hubot be chatty at times? Can we figure out, does Hubot interact in some ways in other chat rooms as opposed to other chat rooms? Yes. So there are settings within are scripts that allow you to specify, for example, which repos should we get alerted on in a specific Slack room. So GitHub has a lot of repositories. I don't care about everyone. I just care about a specific one. So I can turn on that chatter for that specific repository. Depending on how you define your scripts, you can go as fine-grained as you want to. One of the examples was the .com ops, where we only allow deploying to happen in that .com ops repo or Slack channel, but that's available for a lot of different commands as well. Can it be tamed culturally? You create your own culture. So the camel thing, I mean, that's an internal GitHub script that we created. Depending, again, like if you make it easy for people to create their own scripts, they can do that. Oh, so the question also was culturally, was the question also towards culturally? Okay, so that's a good question. Culturally, how do you move towards like a chatops way? It's a good question. I think when you show people the power of what it can do and how easy it is to use, people tend to naturally gravitate towards it. But that being said, it needs to be determined within your organization if it makes sense to integrate Hubot. Question?
What about authorization for the Hubot user to connect to Jenkins, connect to GitHub? Is it easily configurable? Can it be anybody, or is it a shared user?
Yeah. So internally, how we do this, we have some internal scripts that manage this. There is like a GitHub integration that is readily available online in Hubot scripts, and that will, like, you'll pretty much specify a user that you should be interacting with. Usually, that's like a super admin that can view a lot of different repositories. Internally, so we have methods of authentication and authorization that, like, we have our own internally developed scripts that manage some of that. We're also, like, a lot of our repositories are also very open internally for everybody to view. It's just like our cultural mindset.
We use Slack with our business analysts. So we are thinking you use Hubot to. Do you recommend to use Hubot for business analysts?
Yeah, so the question was, do you recommend Hubot to be used with business analysts? If you saw, like, they addressed me, that was sales using Hubot. We have sales, marketing, we have legal using Hubot. Everybody's using Hubot. The reality is, it's actually kind of simple when you learn how to use it, and it's fun. So yeah, I definitely recommend business analysts.
Is there any challenge with using Hubot for operations? Let's say for configuring load balancers or pulling some metrics from Amazon CloudWatch or operation-related things?
Yeah, so is there any challenge with using Hubot for operations? I would say it makes life easier because you don't have to know the specifics of every single system that you're using. You're just remembering the command that you want to use. Now, again, you're not going to remember every single command on your first day. You're going to learn it naturally as things pick up. But again, like, that creates one single interface that you can do, that you can view your data center cameras, that you can deploy, you can make changes to your firewall. All of that we're actually doing from Hubot as well.
How do you train data? How do you train Hubot? And can Hubot be self-improving and more data?
Can Hubot be self-improving, and how do you train Hubot? That's a good question. So, like, again, a lot of it is you're creating your own scripts, and people are contributing to those scripts to make Hubot as useful as possible. Out of the box, Hubot isn't going to do much for you. He'll show nice pictures of squirrels, but the more interesting things you're going to want to design yourself. Can Hubot learn? Why not? I mean, he has a Redis database back, so he has a lot of information. The question is, how do you want to use that information?
Does Hubot some reports or statistics?
Does Hubot have its own statistics? I'm not sure. You can query, meaning on the back end, you can probably look at Redis and stuff. I would probably say if you design like a script to view things, you can do that as well. That's a good question. Alrighty, it looks like I'm done. So thank you so much for attending. And hit me up on Twitter or GitHub handle. Thank you.